You are listening to When Therapists Watch TV, where we discuss today's buzzworthy TV shows and what they can teach us about ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. I'm your host, Dr. Terri Bly, licensed clinical psychologist at LE Mental Health. Okay, so welcome to the season finale of When Therapists Watch TV. This will be our last episode for a while. I'm not sure how long our pause will be, hopefully not too long. But we are ending with a show that's currently quite hot, as they say, on Netflix. It's still trending, I checked, and it's Beef. And if you haven't heard of it, boy, it's definitely worth checking out. This is a show that is unlike any, I have to say, it's unlike any TV show I've ever watched. Not only does it feature an all Asian American cast, or nearly all Asian American cast, it tackles topics differently, and I can't really articulate how differently. It just does it in a way that's different. It starts out very kind of frantic. There's a real intense pilot episode, but then it settles into much deeper character development and gets into some things. And as I was thinking about how I summed up what to me the show was about, what started to come out for me is that Beef is about how we kind of go through life doing the things that are expected of us, that we're told are going to make us happy, are going to make us feel fulfilled, are going to make our parents proud of us, or whatever it is that we think is the reward that we're going for, maybe make us rich. And we get to a certain point in our adult lives where a lot of us realize that either we have not succeeded in doing those things and we have feelings about that, or we did all of the things that we were told we were supposed to do, that we were told would make us happy, and we are not happy. Maybe we're mad, or just really wanting to kind of blow it all up and start over again. But what happens when you don't have any kind of outlet for that? What happens when it doesn't feel acceptable to come right out and say that? What happens when your culture or your family, or for whatever reason, they don't accept that as a possible response, that you don't like where you've ended up, or you don't want to do the things that are being expected of you? So I think Beef does a really amazing job bringing up those questions of, God, we all have these things that people want us to do and that we're told we should be doing and that we should want to do. And then when we don't get there, what happens? What happens to us existentially? What happens to us psychologically? And this, I will say, this show does it in a pretty intense and sometimes violent way. So if you don't like that sort of thing, it might not be your cup of tea. But I think it's worth discussing anyway. So I brought to be my guest today, I have two therapists here at LE who both really enjoy the show, is my understanding, and are going to talk about it with me from their perspectives and what they got out of the show. Because I really want both of you to tell me what you found important and relevant about the show. I have Matt Reed and BJ McElrath, and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. Tell me a little bit about you, who you are as a therapist, and maybe just a little teaser as to what it is you liked about this particular television show.
Go ahead, Matt.
All right, I'll take it. As Terri said, my name is Matt Reed. I'm a therapist at LE. I've been a therapist doing therapy work since 2014. I've spent a good portion of my career working with adult men in the corrections system in both the state of Virginia and Minnesota. I ran anger management groups in those environments, as well as other types of groups, but mostly, working with the adult male population. Which I think part of the reason why this show was so easy to relate to and empathize with is there's a lot of parts of my client in one of the protagonists, Danny's, experiences that are portrayed in the show. So I kind of blew through that pretty fast, but generally I found the show to be very insightful, very accurate, and just very reflective.
When I mentioned the show to you, I was like, have you seen it? And you're like, no. And then I swear to God, it was like 2 hours later, you're like, well, I'm 4 episodes in now.
Yep. You caught me on a good day. I had some free time in the afternoon, and I was able to go through it pretty fast. And it's an easy show to burn a few hours watching.
I was glad to hear. And I didn't even know at the time when I recommended it that you you worked in corrections, with that population and did anger management. So it could not have been a more perfect thing for you so you can bring your expertise and your thoughts. I can't wait to pick your brain about this.
Yes.
BJ, hi.
Yeah. My name is BJ McElrath. I'm a therapist here at LE. I'm also a clinical territory director. And what that means is just as we expand at LE, growing here in Minnesota and also nationally, I just have a group of states that I oversee as we open up those clinics and get them up and running. And so I've been practicing since 2011 and an LPCC and supervisor. So so like I said, this show, there's a couple things that jumped out at me. First of all, it's an all Asian cast or nearly all Asian American cast. So for me personally, when I see that, like that's something, having a foot, I'm half Vietnamese, half Caucasian. And so having a foot in both worlds, it's like whenever I see that part of me, like that just jumps out at me and immediately I'm glued, right? Yeah. So, but then just, all of the stuff, looking at it from the lens of a therapist, from just good TV, good character development, good, writing. Also that pilot episode of like, what is happening in this? Right? Why are they so angry? Yeah. Right. So all of those things, all the way to the end of the, the last scene, just that exploration of human connection. And so had all those things going for it for me. And the episodes were easily digestible. Yeah. I mean, they were only 30 to 40 minutes long, so it's easy to just burn through episodes like you were saying, Matt. So
Yeah, this show just captures so much. And I want to be clear, I'm not going to ask you guys to represent all men. I'm not going to ask you to represent all Asian American men, but I would love your input because I know that like the things that I've read at least about the way Asian men in particular are portrayed in TV and movies, I know that I'd like to think this show explores it with more depth, that it's not, I feel like Asian men kind of get pigeonholed as Amy's in the show, Amy's husband kind of to me represents what Asian men are limited to in Hollywood, where they're kind of gentle, they're soft-spoken, stay-at-home dad, like they don't get to be, I don't know, I feel like you rarely see Asian men getting to have their own storyline, their own, you don't get to see them express anger very often. And so I was really happy to see a show that was written and directed and produced by Asian Americans so that we could actually get those of us who are not from that community get to see a little bit more of real people being portrayed. And I don't know how to say that without sounding like the whitest woman in the world, but I really did appreciate that from that perspective. So I hope that you can share some of that too, just having grown up here and how you've experienced.
Yeah, well, definitely for me, like my experience is not everyone else's experience, and having grown up, again, like how I characterized it, with one foot in both worlds, right? And being Vietnamese is obviously, very different than Korean culture or Chinese American culture, that type of thing. Honestly, when you asked me to be a part of this episode, and we talked about kind of the Asian male experience and Asian male rage type of experience, right? Like, it's not even something that I had personally even considered. But as I thought about it and did some exploration of that, you're absolutely right. How George is characterized in the TV show, that is how most, I don't want to I don't want to overgeneralize, but it is how a lot of Asian American males are characterized as this passive, pacifist type of portrayal, stereotype. And there is a little bit of that underneath, like, well, we're more than that. Yeah. And, it's just, just whether it's through sports culture or, something I follow is like MMA, for example, right? there's not a lot of like Asian American
Yeah.
males in there, right? And then I happen to find there's a Vietnamese American, that in one of, not the UFC, but one of the other Premier Leagues that I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Like, I don't follow MMA too closely, but I'm going to follow this guy because he's, Vietnamese American, and I don't see that ever. And that's not the typical lens that we see Asian Americans through. So
I think this show is also about men trying to connect while also being, living up to the masculine kind of thing. But also there's this underlying, I don't know, like I said, this show is, there's so much here that sometimes I have a hard time even articulating it to myself. But all I notice is just like the simmering rage underneath. That's what I notice most when I'm watching this show is everyone, Amy, and even George has his own, like, he's got his unhappiness and stuff that's simmering, and he's trying to deal with it by being like the most calm, mindful, guy ever. But you can tell that that's not his experience either. And so, Matt, tell me a little bit about what your take on this show is from what you've watched.
What's great about the show is it has so much depth that you could pick one thing and walk a mile and still not reach the end in so many different areas and layers. And I think, obviously, I'm going to use a psychology buzzword here. Obviously, the theme of repression is pretty prevalent in this show. And so what I mean by that is just the defense mechanism that has you believe holding on to feelings and burying them deeply is a good way to go through life. And both of these characters I see try to bury their feelings and have buried their true feelings.
The two main characters, which are Danny
and Amy. Yes. And I would say a lot of other characters also, do this as well. I think part of what makes the show so unique is that their repression ends up building to a boiling point, and it hits a certain level, a critical mass, you could say, where it becomes emotionally, physically unbearable. And they cross paths at a perfect time, like the splitting of an atom that causes this rupture for both of them that takes on a whole new unhealthy, ugly form, which I think a lot of folks were really kind of taken aback by how intense that pilot episode was. And yes, it might be a little bit farther along than what most of us would think of as like, well, if I'm going to have an outburst, it's not going to look like that. That's not me. But really, there's that potential buried in all of us that makes the show very relatable. The anger that comes out of their chosen, their natural defense mechanism coming out in this form is just so interesting, so unique, and plays them at odds with one another, even though they have far more in common than they do not in common.
Yeah, right. So with that simmering under the surface rage, I was thinking about when you were mentioning that repression and how, a lot of us would watch this and think, oh, like, I would never do something like that. I was thinking about, as you were saying that, during the pandemic and right afterwards, there are all these reports of like people losing their minds on airplanes and doing stuff that like happened every once in a while, but there seemed to be this uptick of people behaving badly out in public. And I wonder if that's connected at all, if we can try to push down these feelings, whether it's fear or anger or whatever, that we like to think that we would never express it in some rage kind of way. But I think what we learned over the last couple of years is, maybe a lot more of us would than we realize.
I can't think of a better kind of an opportunity for us to reach that boiling point than a period of time where we were unable to use or utilize the coping strategies that we have been used to all our entire lives, and a lot of them that were used to kind of poke holes in the steam pot to let out the pressure to not reach that boiling point, that all of those things, or most of those things, we'll say, much of them were taken away completely, and we were left to just figure it out. And a lot of us didn't figure it out.
That's an excellent point. Our coping skills, exercising, being sports, going out for drinks with friends or coworkers or whatever, all of that was taken away. We were just sitting at home with our feelings, not knowing what to do with them. So,
and that increased isolationism too during the pandemic, and even a little bit after. We're kind of on the other side of that. Again, going back to that human connection piece too, like, you know, if you're not having that human connection, and that all boils, I mean, it all ties into our coping mechanisms and that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, that boiling point, it's, you know, that the temperature for that boiling point is just reduced and reduced and reduced, and then next thing we know, we're just boiling over.
We're boiling over. So in this show, what do you think, you know, I think with Amy, I've got thoughts on being a woman and kind of the expectations on you, but what do you think for the men in the show? Where is that anger coming from? What is your understanding about where their frustration and their anger? Because this is kind of, I do think this is a show about anger. It's about rage. It's about frustration and not knowing how to. That's why it boils over, right? Is no good outlet to poke those holes, like you were saying. So where do you think, and I'm going to start with you, BJ, where do you think that anger is coming from? Why are they so frustrated?
I mean, yeah, when you take a look at like the character of Danny specifically, and all of that, there's a lot of different like role expectations that you can immediately see, especially like this pressure that he has to, you know, provide for his brother and provide for his family. You know, it comes out in the later episodes that he's trying to bring his parents over, and he wants to buy this lot for them and build this house for them, and they're back in Korea right now, and then that relationship between he and his parents, you know, might be a little bit strained, and they have these expectations on him, and so all of these things, plus maybe a little bit of racism involved as well, whether it's microaggressions or whatever it might be, right? And that and systemic classism as well, and so all of these things just kind of like putting this pressure on him, right? And then just his own expectations of himself, right? Like, I'm not living up to whatever, you know, I'm not living up to his own, he's not living up to his own expectations. He's not living up to his parents' expectations. He's not, you know, doing enough for his brother, all of these things. And, you know, and then it just boils over.
So that's, light bulb moment for me as you were saying that, the racism, classism, microaggression, what ignites the anger is him having someone in a white Mercedes SUV or something. And he doesn't know, you know, the race of the woman in it, but when you think white Mercedes SUV in California, like you're thinking, you know, some rich white lady, right? And so that representation of, like, and it's a microaggression, right? Like maybe slightly more than micro, but you know, that it's like that one last thing, and like a reminder of all of the stuff that's been keeping him from being able to do the things he's trying to do.
Yeah, and it comes out later in one of the episodes where his brother actually refers to Danny as, Paul, the brother refers to Danny as broken. Right? And so, and I don't think Danny he never addresses that, but I don't think he would like disagree with that. Right? And so, you know, and there's I forget how they phrase it in that episode, but Danny's spreading his brokenness around the world, and so, and that's one of the you know, effects of racism. It makes us feel broken. Like, right, and so it makes us feel like we're less than, and so all of that, you know, to say that, you know, then he, you know, like you said, that one moment, it's that tipping point, and so, and you find out that what he was doing at that grocery store, and spoiler alert, what he was doing at the grocery store, returning those hibachi grills, he had intended to use those grills to end his life.
Oh, that's right.
So
That's right. I forgot about that.
yeah. So so he's already at a breaking point, and then that happens. We we don't know if racism or microaggression is involved in that, or if he perceived that or not. It's not explicitly said, but it's just a
all
culmination.
these forces
all these forces
he feels like are keeping him from being able to do the things he's trying so hard to do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about his character that's so compelling is he keeps trying. Like he keeps trying to find a way to do the things. It's like he can't stop himself from trying to provide for his parents, from trying to be there for his brother, but he can't figure out a path there. So he just gets more and more desperate in his schemes to do the things that are really like that's what's so like heartbreaking about it is he's not trying to be a billionaire. He's not trying to whatever. He's just trying to provide for his family and for his parents, bring them over from Korea, and that's all he's trying to do. And he just feels like there are all these obstacles in his path. So he's like, screw it. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do whatever way I can find to do these things. But you also see how hard it is for him because that's not who he is as a person.
Yeah. And I think a good kind of moment that where you see that brokenness in him, or that at least that perception of brokenness that he's feeling, is that scene where he steps foot into the church.
Yes.
Right. He stepped foot in, and there was like this beautiful song playing in the church. And if you look at the lyrics, it's about brokenness. Right. And then he breaks down and he's just crying and crying and crying. Right. And that could have been a pivotal moment for him. It wasn't necessarily, but it was a glimpse into his soul a little bit, and the pressures that he was feeling and facing and that type of thing.
Well, it's a glimpse to that, like someone might be like just come across as a selfish asshole, out for themselves, but then it's kind of that scene is really that reminder of like there's something much, much bigger underneath. And the anger is just how it's coming out.
Yeah. And isn't that what we always say about anger too?
Yeah.
Right? The whole iceberg analogy where, I do this with kids. Like I draw an iceberg and, I'm like, here's your anger, that's the part that you see. And going to what you were talking about, repression, like here's like all the things underneath.
Well, and in the first episode of this podcast, I had two men in here, and they were talking about how for men there are two acceptable emotions. There's like fine and angry.
Yeah.
And there's not, so those are your choices. You can be fine or you can be angry. And so when you don't have another outlet, when you don't have another way to express a more complex range of emotions, then at some point it comes out as anger. So you worked in, you said you did anger management trainings.
Yep, anger management at a prison.
Yeah. So I bet you have lots of thoughts you could share with us about anger and what's in there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I could talk about this for days. I would say one of the key, if I could summarize a lot of the themes and things that I talked with my guys with in group and in the individual work that I did, as far as anger is concerned, I think this is a very universal aspect of this emotion. Is originally, or at its heart, anger is a red flag emotion.
Okay.
Anger, at least how I conceptualize it as a therapist, it is an emotion to alert you that something is wrong, unjust, or out of balance. And it comes in a very intense form, an intense feeling. It might not necessarily start really intense, but gradually will build until you start to notice it more. I think culturally, at least in America, that we've done such a good job at repressing our emotions that it takes a while for things to hit that point where we really start to notice it, right? We'll notice maybe a minor inconvenience or a frustration with a conversation that takes place, and we just kind of dismiss it, right? There's that maybe whatever defense mechanism you want to put in there just to kind of like get it out of the way. I don't need this right now. It's inconvenient. I don't have the time to deal with this, whatever it is. But one of the things I always wanted to teach anyone that I was working with on anger is not bad.
Right.
Anger is not something that you can get rid of.
Okay.
Anger is designed to alert you to something that is wrong.
Right.
Right? Something that within your belief system or your biology that is out of whack, that needs to be looked at. So that was one thing that I always took away from that, is trying to educate the guys who I saw, who some of them were in prison because of their anger outbursts, right? And like in this show, there's a lot of like things that people could have gone to prison for, and a lot of things that I have seen people go to prison for that were acted out in this. I mean, at one point there's, you know, a home break-in, right? Spoiler alert, sorry, it's a little late. I didn't get too specific though, so I think I'm off the hook. But like things like that, that our anger and other emotions can lead us to if we do not deal with them earlier on, right? It doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's a gradual increase because, again, it's there to get your attention.
Right.
And usually by the time we get to it, it becomes pretty unbearable.
And so with this show, what I see is that some of that anger, at least from my perception, is that they were trapped for whatever reason. They felt trapped, they felt blocked from doing the things that they wanted to do, that they needed to do, that they like doing, or whatever, that there's this like constant bumping up against a wall. And I imagine in a prison system, because our prisons are filled with disproportionately like people of color, that the microaggression you're speaking of, or outright aggressions, that builds up anger, that's out of balance, it's unjust, right? And so those things, and how do you express it? How do you express it if your culture is not okay with anger? How do you express it if your partner is not okay with anger? Like, what are healthy ways then that, like the men in this show, for example, what options do they have, really? Like, where?
Well, I mean, when we use the word anger management, though, I mean, just kind of building off what you were saying, like, that almost seems like a misnomer, right? Like, because we're not supposed to, you know, based on what you were saying, and I really loved how you were just describing that, and I think you're spot on. And so, but based off of that, like, you don't manage the anger, right? You manage whatever is unjust or whatever the red flag is about. And so, I don't know if you want to speak more to that in context of everything, but yeah, that's just something that jumped out at me.
How do you do that when it's a system?
Yeah.
You know, when it's all system that's set up to work against you.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And how can we expect people to not be angry living in a system that was not made for them?
Yeah.
But really was made to keep them out. I mean, we don't learn that much in history class about all of the different ways that we have we being white Americans have like kept Asian. We talk about black, you know, slaves and black people, and how we don't even talk enough about that, but we give even less attention to anti-Asian sentiment and the history of that in this country. And so when there's a system that is not built for your success, you know, what do you do? How do you manage anger at a system, or deal with it, or express it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
Can we solve the big problem in this country in this conversation, please?
Yeah, we're going to solve the world's problems here.
Yeah.
How much time do we have?
But I mean, I think it goes back to, again, like in the show, like the need to feel seen, right? And so, you know, like during the pandemic, when you know, they were calling the virus, the COVID virus, they're calling it Kung flu or the China virus and those type of things, right?
Yeah. Yep.
They're, you know, the wave of anti-Asian kind of sentiment grew, and I didn't experience it personally. I was lucky, but I had friends and colleagues that, you know, would come to work crying because things were said to them on the street or things were said to them at the store, and you know, and my heart just broke for that, and I think just this acknowledgement, awareness, and just like saying, I see you, right? I see that your experience is different, and you know, and staying off social media too. Social media can be such a hot mess.
Yeah. Yes. And if you're going to be on it, stay out of the comments section. Social media.
Yeah. And the sad part is a lot of people in the comments section are people just like the characters in this show,
Going there to
who
express
are
their anger.
they're finding any avenue that they can as safely as possible to project, right? There's another one where they're just trying to put what they have such a hard time feeling themselves. Can I put this somewhere else? Because I'm tired of dealing with it.
In a safe place.
As safe as they can, which is anonymous keyboard warrior style. Like that happens. I would say every minute, but probably more frequently than that. Is people are really exhausted. They're tired. They're in pain.
They're frustrated.
They're frustrated, and they're feeling hopeless, and they don't know what else to do about it. There was something that I think both of you touched on that I want to go back to, especially when it came to when you were talking about, BJ, about expectations. If I could boil the show down to one thing other than anger, which I think is apt, expectation is the
expectations.
other. Boy, oh boy, that theme starts and finishes the show.
Yep.
And one of the things that came to mind when watching this show was the relatable theme of expectations and how we both simultaneously accept and reject expectations that are put on us. We accept them with our behaviors and sometimes with our thoughts, but we reject them with our heart and soul.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that juxtaposition that creates the red flag, right? Like, what about expectations can create red flags? Well, when we don't ascribe or believe those expectations fully, or they're just so difficult to achieve. We have so many barriers and obstacles that get in the way of achieving those, right? Because I think Danny experienced this maybe a little bit more due to the fact that he was kind of doing everything on his own, right? And creating this business, picking up where, I think it was his cousin who had like
blown up,
kind of helped destroy the business, and he kind of had to pick up the pieces from that. So he's starting 10 yards behind, just having your efforts thwarted at every turn, and you're still in that mindset of I have to do this, I have to do that, and the feeling of I don't think I can, or I don't want to, I just don't want to, and that anger builds of I can't hold both of these things in my hands at the same time.
Well, and I think with Amy, we see that with her too, with being a woman and a mom, and she thinks that what she wants is to sell the business so she can be with her family more. But then we see as this goes on that's not what she wants. She wants to be like when she was on that stage in that episode, and like she got off, she was like, I still want in, I don't want to be done. And you get to see like for her, it's like she's got these things that she's passionate about, and it's competing with the expectations of her as a mom and a wife. And how she's struggling with that, and struggling with the expectations that she's feeling for herself. I think there's also the expectations, about being second generation or first generation, children of immigrants, and the expectations. I hear a lot about if your parents, immigrated here, the expectations of you are that you are going to be successful because they made they made a bunch of sacrifices to come here, or that's just what's expected of you culturally, and the pressure that puts on people too, when they're living with those expectations. Or if you just have parents who are kind of never happy with your accomplishments, and they just want you to keep doing more. In fact, I was driving my daughter and a friend of hers, and this girl's a first generation college student, and she's getting recruited from these Ivy League colleges, and I was like, oh my gosh, your parents must be so proud. And she's like, they more just want to know, like, okay, what next, what more? And I had this, and she's not white. I don't want to say anything more about her, but I just had this like, oh my God, I totally just made an assumption there and then to hear her be like, yeah, no, they're not just proud of me. They want, I'm a first generation college student. They want to know, like, what else can I do? What else can I accomplish? Where can I go? And those expectations. And as she was talking about it, I could see the weight of those expectations on her.
And it's because those expectations are not like a one and done type of thing.
And that's
right?
what she was saying.
It's a never ending. It's a grind, and so you've never made it. Like there's always this ladder that you have to climb.
And is there anger that builds that you keep trying, and there's always what next, what more.
Yeah. Resentment.
Yeah. And what do you do with that? And I think that's what I love about this show is I think it explores, like, at some point it's gonna boil over. That we need outlets. We need to be able to say, this is how I'm experiencing this.
Yeah.
Before we're, running people over or, blowing everything up.
What about the theme? I mean, before we started rolling the cameras, I mean, you were talking about your psychodynamic perspective,
Yeah, I was just
right?
going to ask that too. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not hijacking you as the host.
I'm curious. I was about to go there.
But there's a spoiler alert towards the end where she talks about home and where is home, right? And she thought Junie was going to be, she thought it was going to be George, and then she thought it was going to be Junie. But she never like truly found home for her. And there's also those flashbacks of her actual home, and then her actually going back to home, right? And just still never feeling at home. I'm just kind of curious from your, I'm not psychodynamically trained, but, can you kind of speak more towards that?
Ali Wong's character, Amy, is just such an interesting study because as a man looking onto this, I definitely had to take a step back and use a lot of empathy to kind of get, where she was coming from there. And I know a lot of her flashbacks had to do with her own, like, coming of age through her sexuality, for example, is one. And then also how she reconciled the expectations of her parents with what she felt like she wanted or needed in her teenage years and early formative years. And so the idea of home is definitely a good study for her, because, like, when we think of what home is, it's supposed to be a place of rest, a place where you can relax,
Be safe. You're safe, and you can be yourself and be accepted.
Kick your
for who you are.
shoes off. There's not going to be much expected of you here, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we're going to keep using that language, that there was never a chance for her to ever feel that home in the most fundamental way, right? Even when she was home, there was never this feeling of homeostasis, this feeling of peace and calm. Her parents were constantly fighting and yelling at each other, talking a lot about her, about things that were maybe that they were failing as parents, but came out in, our daughter is different, or our daughter is struggling. And part of that was maybe their way of externalizing or projecting their own failings as parents, or not feeling inept, or feeling inept at the job they'd done so far, which then Amy internalizes as, I'm a bad kid, and I don't like feeling bad in a place where I should or want to feel safe. So then, if the first experience of home is not good, which I think a lot of people can identify with, then you're going to search for it somewhere else. You're going to look for it in every other place.
It's going to be harder to find it.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have that, you don't even really know you don't know what's going to feel like. You don't know how to feel at home. You don't know how to feel like yourself. You don't even maybe know what that looks like to just be yourself with no expectations, relax, shoes off, no makeup, whatever. Like, you don't know what that feels like. So you're going to search for something, but you're not really sure what you're searching for.
Right. Never feeling like you can let your guard down.
Right. Which we see with her, like, even with her husband. You can see that, like, she makes these little bids, she tries, and then he doesn't respond in a way that he's hearing her or whatever, and so immediately she just puts the wall back up, and it's back to, I'm fine. You guys you mentioned too, I think before the show started, this theme of connection, and I have to say that I don't know if it's because we've been talking about it on this podcast or if shows are doing this more, but I feel like I'm noticing more shows start to explore men trying to connect with other men and the importance of that, and how hard it is, how awkward it can be, how it can come out kind of sideways. But even in this show, like, there are moments between these male characters, even ones who seem to have very few redeeming qualities, they try to make these little bits, like they're planning a crime, and he's like, well, I got into UT Austin, and like they're trying to like, does this have gluten? Is this okay? I don't want processed foods. I just feel like they're trying to do these, with their underneath their macho, like bravado kind of thing, they're trying to reach out and just talk about normal life stuff and health and goals and whatever with each other, but it just seems like it's so hard for them. And I'm just wondering what you guys think about that.
I think there's been a shift in our culture, obviously with more mental health awareness, trying to destigmatize getting mental health help, right? And having a greater understanding of the impacts of trauma, whatever that might look like for a person, and what that can do. I mean, there was a whole generation that grew up in kind of like a John Wayne type of culture, right? But now, I do some work with first responders, and there's always been this, in the past, this culture of like, I'm okay, right? Like, we're not gonna talk about it and sweeping it under the rug or whatever that looks like. But now there's more and more. Even here at Ellie, we have various contracts with various police departments and fire departments, and I've been involved with critical debriefings and working with peer support groups at fire departments, where we're talking about the things that we've seen and the impact that it's had on us, right? And so I think that's just kind of a broader, maybe cultural thing, where it's okay to not be okay, and okay to talk about mental health and that type of thing. So
do you feel like it's getting easier for men to open up to other men, just friendships? Is that still a challenge, do you think? And does the show shed any light on that?
I think it'll always be a challenge.
Yeah. Is it ingrained in us?
That's a great question, because
we've got like a lot of space between us right now.
True. I was planning on putting my arm around you, BJ, but I didn't know how comfortable you'd be with that. No, but seriously though, I think we are taking steps. How big those steps are in the grand scheme of things, it's hard to say. I would say, generally speaking, I totally agree, BJ. I think John Wayne was an excellent example of that bravado in film, that machismo in film, where you have to ascribe to these expectations of who a man is, what a man is allowed to do and not allowed to do in order to meet the criteria, right? I think the definition of what a man is has been expanded in the last, who knows how long, but it's ever so expanding into what is considered acceptable for being a man, which to me, it's even hard to say like what it should be and what it shouldn't be, because it comes with so many personal biases of my own experience. But I will say this, as a mental health professional, being able to tap into your emotions and relate with other people has not historically been something associated with being a man, and it's got to change.
Yeah,
it has to change.
Because we see how, like, these little bids they make in the show are, like, we just see how they're trying, but it's so hard. And when you can't connect, we see the loneliness that these men, even though they're interacting with each other, they also strike me as so isolated and so lonely. And I think they even say that. I think George, Amy's husband, talks about being lonely. I think they express that. They're with other people, but they're feeling lonely.
Yeah, I think there's even a moment where Danny talks about his little brother Paul, and he says, I should have talked to him more.
Yeah.
Right? Should have connected with him more.
Right. Rather than just trying to like raise him or whatever. He just was so focused on being a big brother and those expectations that he didn't spend the time to just connect with them on a person to person.
Yeah.
I was gonna agree with that Danny's character, he is a very isolated and lonely person, and so I think that that doesn't do anybody any good to feel like they're alone in all of this. And I think that's what the very last scene, the very last episode of the show, without getting into too much detail, helps to kind of provide that clarity for its audience that you might feel alone, and you might feel like you're the only one dealing with what you're dealing with. And on a specific micro level, that's true, but on a macro level, couldn't be more false. That we all, even the people that we think are complete opposites of us, are enemies, right? As these two characters are somewhat, you know, they see each other as like they're mortal enemies on Earth, right? They eventually, that changes.
Yeah.
And
Through
they
that
realize,
shared, yeah.
yeah, they realize how
that
much
that's
in
shared.
common.
Yeah.
Unbelievable amounts in common. It takes a lot to get there, and eventually they figure it out.
Yeah.
They find it.
Well, I feel like we're already at time, and I feel like we've barely skimmed the surface of this show. And obviously, we're not going to solve the problem of isolation and microaggressions and racism and like role expectations and gender and class and all of that. But I really, really encourage people to watch this show. I think it gives us this unique window into what is a very common human experience, but also shows us what it's like for different people based on their own histories, their own families, their cultures, and we just don't get to watch a show that takes this approach very often. And so I hope you consider watching it. And thank you guys both for just touching on some of these really critical themes. And I didn't finish the season yet, but I will message you guys when I finish and let you know. But thank you so much for joining me here in the season finale.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I really appreciate this. And I also want to thank Jesse, Lucas, and Tu for all of the help. I mean, this show wouldn't have happened without the three of them, and I can't be more grateful. I could not be more grateful for everything that they have done to make this a very polished first season of a podcast. So thanks to all three of you guys for everything you've done. And that's a wrap. This episode of When Therapists Watch TV was produced by Ellie Mental Health. Miranda Barker is the managing producer. Jesse Stenbrotten is the technical director. Our production team also includes Julia Galloway, Lucas Mooney, and Tu Pham. A special thanks to Lucas Fellini, Nick Seeger, and Mel Springer. I'm Dr. Terri Bly. Thanks for listening.